Okay. So just to recall what we were doing in last class, we talked about this example, right? And what you are trying to do was you are trying to see whether agricultural training programs have any impact on agricultural households per capita income, right? We estimate so these are the kind of empirical models that we estimated, okay? And then I showed you these results, right? Okay, we have started recording. So I showed you these results and you saw how as we add these control variables, the coefficient on the training program reduces, the magnitude goes down, right? And this is shown in this figure. And we concluded that it's possible that the treatment effect or this coefficient may actually asymptotically approach zero as you keep on adding more variables, right? So there, what we concluded was that there was a strong selection on observables here in this particular case, right? So the assumption of the conditional independence assumption or the assumption of selection on observables is violated in this particular example because we see the coefficient magnitude going down as we add control variables. So we don't have confidence in these results. Okay. So I would just like to, so this is just an example of, how one can, how one thinks about causality and selection bias or omitted variables, unobservables, observables, and how do you start with establishing causality with observational data? So that's what, it's just an example, but we can formalize this to a more general setup. And so this idea of the average treatment effect, moving with addition of controls, we can formalize this and generalize this. So to formalize this structure, and you probably would have seen this earlier also, but is essentially what is happening here is in this kind of a regression that we estimated, this kind of a regression, essentially what is happening is that there still can be in this regression where the dependent variable is agricultural per capita income and what we are interested in delta, which is the coefficient on training program dummy. The problem may be that, although we have a vector of control variables here, which is land and land size, household size, all those things, education, it's still possible that we are missing some more control variables, right? So there can be many other things which influence the relationship between whether a farmer attends a training program and whether a farmer has and what is the income of that farm household. So, for example, so can you think of an example in this particular case that we are working with, where we are trying to see the impact of a training program on a farm household agricultural income? Can you think of an example, or can you think of a variable which can simultaneously influence both of these things? And anybody, can you try to think of something, variables other than what we have in this regression table? Can you think of a variable which may influence both of these things, but it's not here, it does not feature here? Anybody?
Sir, can you again repeat the question?
So you remember what we were doing in the last class? We were talking about how to estimate the impact of this agricultural training program on the farm household per capita agricultural income. So these training programs basically inform farmers about new technology, new ways of doing things, and they do this so that the agricultural income of the farmers increase, right? They adopt new technology and their income increases. So can you think of something, a variable or some variables which may influence both their attending these training programs and the agricultural income, but does not feature in the regression that I've just shown you?
So somehow we can capture the state effects, because depending on state government policies and other things, there can be a lot of variation.
Right. So for example, can you give us, tell us any one policy, like to narrow it down, like for example?
So policy would be a supply of electricity probably, and something related to geographical factors would be the soil quality.
Right. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else would like to add to this?
So,
So
technology.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
okay, so I was saying that maybe the last year's income can also be important here. So the farmers whose income is high, there is more probability that they'll attend this training program, and in the next year also their income would be high.
Right. So this is a very good point, actually. And I will talk about this, what you have mentioned, this, later on, exactly. Yes, somebody else was also saying something.
Technology, communication, and education. Three would be major selection problems for the farmers. So very aloof farmers, very farmers who are in backward region, who have no
Right.
education and no technology and no communication with these people, would be hard pressed to actually come to the training. And even if they come to the training with all the technological and communication biases, the education may be a problem for them. So education may not only be a simple linear, I mean, the continuous variable, it would be a dummy variable as well.
Right. Okay. So why are these things a problem? Like, oh, we don't control for all these things, like access to roads and all those things, or past income, or state policies and all those things. Why do you think that may be an issue here?
So if say the backward region is the problem, then which is related to technology, then these people who are not coming are technologically backward. So you can expect them to have lesser income than the other people who are coming for the training. So
Okay.
Sir, if we are talking about technology and like accessibility to these training programs or their things, wouldn't operational land holdings be a proxy for it? Because the lesser the land you hold, the lesser the productivity is, because you are, sowing the same land over and over again. So wouldn't operational land holdings be another proxy for accessibility to these training programs or the technology or things like that?
In what sense? So how are you thinking about this? So you're saying that if your land size is small, how does that influence your access to training program?
Because usually land size small means when the average land size is small, then usually it indicates that the farmer is a small marginal farmer. And
Right.
when it's a small marginal farmer, it is likely to belong to a very backward region. It is very
Right.
highly unlikely that a state with a good agriculture status has
Mm,
small land holdings. When we compare Punjab and Bihar, for that matter, both of
mm,
them are agriculture states, but the average land holding size of Bihar is very much less than that of Punjab.
mm. Good
So,
point.
uh, sir,
That's
tech, sir, access to technology can also be incorporated in the amount of land held by the farmer. Because if he has the land, he has more money. If he has more money, he has access to more technology and resources, and he is more informed than the smaller, the marginal farmers.
okay. This is a good line of thinking. But tell me one thing. So you said that you compared Bihar and Punjab, so is it possible? Just a question: is it possible that land which is naturally more fertile may have smaller plots than land which is less fertile, along with other things? And like, of course, other things also influence the size of the plot, but
Sir, land holding size and plot size are two different things.
But is it possible that regions which are more fertile may have smaller plots endogenously than regions which have less fertile land?
Yes, sir, it is possible. Actually, at the region which is more fertile, their agriculture intensity will be higher.
Right. Okay, all of you are right. It's good that you are thinking on those lines. Yeah, all these things, the things that you just mentioned, all of these things would influence this relationship. And the point is that the causality that we're trying to establish may be the structural model, so to say. Okay, what is happening in the background through which these two things are related may be far more complicated than what this simple regression equation will capture. Okay, so but econometrically, in simple terms, what we have are omitted variables. All of these things that you mentioned, like access to infrastructure or state policies or soil quality or all those things, or for that matter, an ability of a farmer, how able or how progressive they are in going for new technologies. These are all omitted variables, right? We don't have them in the control vector X, and so they are all lying in they are all there in the residuals, the error terms. And what is the problem? The problem is that the assumption that we make to identify the parameter in an ordinary least squares framework is, if you remember, is basically that the conditional expectation of the error term conditional on x's should be 0, or to simplify it, the covariance between the treatment, in this case, which is training, and the error term should be conditional on the x's that we have in the regression should be 0, right? So since we have these omitted variables, they are all there in the error terms. This assumption of the covariance, the conditional covariance of the training program and the error term is 0. It will may very well be violated, right? So that's the main problem. So we are not able to identify the a theorized relationship or the structural relationship that we are trying to establish here, right? Although if we run a regression on this data, as you saw, it will give you a coefficient, it will give you an estimate. But the theorized relationship that we had in our mind was to estimate the causal relationship between training program, or to say basically that this difference in productivity or this difference in agricultural income is because of this training program. And we cannot say that with this model, because we have omitted variables and we are violating a very important assumption to identify the true parameter, the theorized parameter, or the structural parameter, so to say, right? So to basically capture this econometrically, you can see it's a very simple thing to do. It's basically, it boils down to having an omitted variable bias in our estimates, and we saw how that omitted variable bias functions, like through this graph, right? So it's very easy to characterize it econometrically. We work with the same model, right? It's the same. You have yi alpha plus delta di plus the error term, and assume that the error term, this error term, is a composite error term. So it has two parts. So there is this lambda I, okay, and then there is the error, true error. So this is your the noise term or the IID error term, like mean zero, normally distributed, well behaved, serially uncorrelated, homoscedastic error term. Okay, but this lambda I, which is there in the error term, is capturing all those omitted variables that we talked about. Okay, so it can be farmer's ability, progressiveness. A farmer is more progressive, wants to learn about new technologies, or it can be state policies, differences in policies. It can also be differences in farm, soil quality, or whatever access. You can think of it as anything. Okay. So this is the composite error term. So we know that delta hat under OLS, if we estimate this through OLS, ordinary least squares, would give it's a simple expression. It's basically covariance of by I, the outcome, and the treatment di divided by variance of di, right? So this expression we know. In matrix, in terms of, if you write this in matrix form, it would be X transpose X inverse X transpose Y. So it's so this is what it is. It's basically covariance of the outcome and the treatment divided by variance of the treatment. So simple algebra, you can substitute this equation, this function here by I. You can write the alpha plus delta di plus the composite error term times d and di, and you can solve this thing up, and it will essentially give you this delta hat is equal to delta plus this covariance. So this is covariance of the composite error term, this one, times the treatment divided by variance of the treatment. Okay, so we have this. So what this is saying is that delta hat that we estimate would be delta, the true delta that we are interested in, plus something else. Okay, it's going to be this additional term, and this additional term, you can refine this further by substituting what we had here, the composite error term, into this expression. And you can again do this. So by assumption, we are assuming that this epsilon I is the IID error term, right? And so this is by assumption that we have made, that this error is the covariance of this error term with the treatment is 0, but this is the omitted variable, right? So so you again so this covariance epsilon I di will be 0. So what you are left with is delta hat. What we estimate is delta plus this expression. Okay, and basically, for like, the numerator is important, because the numerator is saying that the bias, and this is the bias, right? You can, so this bias, you can think of, so this numerator that we have in this bias term, okay, this numerator is the most critical thing here, because if the numerator is 0, the whole expression is 0. So what it is saying is that if there is a correlation or covariance between the omitted variable, or that may be the that may be farmer's ability, or that may be soil type, and the treatment, then we are in trouble. Okay, then we are going to have bias in our estimates. Okay, so now whatever you all said right now can actually be characterized in this very simple way. Okay, so basically whatever variable that you thought of, like soil type or policies or whatever, essentially the problem is in terms of estimating the structural parameters, or the theorized relationship, or the population parameter, whatever you may call it. The main issue here is that omitted variable, if that soil quality which is omitted is correlated with the treatment, how the treatment was assigned, right, or how the training program were conducted, then we have a problem. Then that means that our delta that we estimate will be the true plus something else. We don't know what that is. Notice that this covariance may be positive or negative, right? So depending upon what is the sign of this expression, the estimated delta hat may either be less than or more than the true delta. So that again is a problem. So not only do you have to ensure think about the covariance between the omitted variables and the treatment, but you also may have to think about the direction of the covariance. So what would be this relationship, or the selection is going in which direction? Is it the case that better soil regions with better soil quality also had more training programs? Or is it that regions with better soil quality had less training programs? So what was the association between these two things? We don't know, right? So so this is the main problem, and so you can write this expression as this. So basically, estimated delta hat is the true delta plus a delta which is just due to this selection bias driven by omitted variables. Okay, and if suppose we knew this lambda I, if suppose this lambda I was observed, suppose we could observe ability, then what is this expression? It is essentially it's essentially this itself is a coefficient from a regression, and a regression of the following type. So if you run a regression, if suppose lambda is observable, if you run a regression where the dependent variable is lambda I, and you regress it on the treatment that we have training here, the coefficient on the treatment, this coefficient is the bias, right? Is the bias that we have in our estimates. And this, you could see this, the role of this bias here in the figure that I showed you, right? So in this particular case, what would you imagine the covariance between these variables and treatment is, that you see delta I going down? Can anybody guess?
So it's positive, but the magnitude is unknown.
So the bias, so we talked about that covariance of omitted variable times the treatment. Okay. So, and we see that delta has is delta plus that term. So in this figure that you see that as we add omitted variables, so equation 1 has all variables omitted, equation 2 we add something, 3 we add something, so on. So what do you think the covariance between these omitted variables and the treatment is in with respect to this figure that you see? Is it positive or is it negative? Any guess?
So should be positive, right?
Positive.
Right. So so this is the way, it's a very simple you know, this what we have talked about in the context of the Rubin's causal model and all this, the idea of selection and all. It's not econometrically, it's not very sophisticated, you know, but the ideas are very powerful because it has universal appeal in that sense, right? If you are interested in identifying a causal relationship, and this literature is not recent, and people have started focusing on this kind of work, but it's in that sense not very new. So, but the idea of selection was you know, the way people used to do these things was different earlier on. Now they do it in a different way. So have you heard of the Heckman selection model by any chance? Have you been taught about selection, as you know, like Heckman selection?
No, sir.
No? Okay. So you know of James Heckman? Have you heard of? No. So basically this literature came from, you know, it was mainly developed by labor economists, because labor economists were trying to the kind of questions that they were trying to they were exploring were of the following kind. So, for example, they would like to estimate the returns to education. Okay, like they would like to see what happens if you add a few more years of schooling. Is education is going to college beneficial at all, or does that add to your income or wages? So these were the kind of questions that they were thinking of. And when you think of these questions in the context of, let's say, women, okay, the problem is that or men for that matter, anybody for that matter, you observe wages or outcomes of people who are actually going out into the labor market, right? So, for example, this case is quite prominent for women, for example, right? So not all the women, as we know, go out into the labor market, participate in the labor market. So you see, and the wages that you see, the wage rates that you see women getting are for women who go out to work in the labor market. But what about women who are staying at home, right? So there was a selection problem here. The selection problem was that some women were self-selecting to go out to work in the labor market, right? It's a decision. It's a decision that the agent takes whether to go out or whether to stay at home, and it's also to some extent applicable for men. So these were the kind of questions they were trying to answer. And so if you run a regression where you try to see what happens, like a women's education, a woman's education and her wage rate in future, the problem is that the set of women for whom you're observing wage rates are themselves a selected sample, right? So, so these economists, James Hickman and I guess it was also McFadden, labor economists in late 80s, they recognize this, that there is this bias. There's going to be a bias, selection bias, when we estimate a regression on these group of women. So then they said that first, before we estimate the returns to education, we have to first identify the decision-making process through which these people decide to whether stay at home, not work, or go out for work. So before you actually estimate the returns to education or their labor market returns, you have to first determine the selection criterion. Okay, so to say. And what is it that is driving their decision to not go versus not go? And parallelly, similar questions were also being asked in industrial organization literature, where people were trying to estimate the demand for various goods. So, like for example, cars, different cars or cereals. So there is a very famous paper on cereal demand. By cereal, I mean breakfast cereal, like what we eat, cornflakes and all those things. A very famous paper which estimates the demand for cereals in the US market. So similarly, cable TV and all those things. So the IO literature was simultaneously dealing with estimating demand, and as we have already talked about, the estimating demand elasticity is very challenging, right? Why? Because we don't observe the structural demand and supply equations. What we observe is the equilibrium outcomes, equilibrium points. So, and we know that behind these equilibrium points are rational decision-making agents who are deciding, who have their utility functions and budget constraints, and then they are deciding what to choose. And on the other hand, the producers are also minimizing their costs based on their production functions. So, so the key thing in labor literature and this industrial organization theory was that we were dealing with rational decision-making agents who were optimizing each agent, at least theoretically, the way theory was written. All of them were optimizing. They're doing their own optimization. And econometricians at that time wanted to explicitly bring in the optimization exercise, these optimization exercises. So the labor economists tried to model this selection process. So before you estimate the returns to education, they wanted to model the selection itself. And so the selection would be a 1-0 decision, okay? Whether a woman, if you observe a woman going out into the labor market, it's 1. And if you observe a woman not going out into the labor market, it's 0, right? So 1-0, it's a 1-0 decision, whether I want to, whether I don't want to. And you would first explain that decision, and conditional on these women deciding to go out, then they would estimate the returns to education. So they had 2 equations. It boiled down, the econometrics boiled down to have estimating two equations, and these equations were connected to each other through an assumption of a joint normality of the error terms. So there were 2 equations. Imagine that you have 2 equations. One is a binary equation, a probit logit kind of a thing, and the other was a linear equation, and the error terms of both of those equations were correlated. That's what they assumed, they were correlated, and they assumed that it was a bivariate normal distribution, so linear correlation. And basically, essentially, Heckman showed that you set up this optimization problem, you solve the optimization problem, you come up with 2 equations, you solve those equations, and then you get a Heckman selection corrected returns to education equation. And that Heckman selection corrected regression equation essentially had like wages as the dependent variable, your education as the main independent variable, and what used to, because of that selection process, an additional term would appear as an additional control variable, and that's known as the selection correction. So basically, that additional control variable which appears in that system corrects for selection bias. Okay, but in that literature, people didn't think of it this way, the way we are talking about omitted variables right now, in terms of expressing that in terms of a simple omitted variable bias, and relating that to how statisticians thought about identification in terms of potential outcomes. So there is a long history of trying to account for selection in observational data, but it was done initially. It was done in a very structural way. In IO also, these things were done in a very structural way. So there are these, I don't know whether you do that in your econometrics too, but you have these models. They are called conditional logic models, and then multivariate, multivariate normal, what do they call it? M-logit, M-probit and M-logit models. So which essentially first model the decision-making process. So your utility from doing something is greater than your utility from not doing something. And then under some assumptions on those functions, you can basically derive an equation. And those equations, in certain cases, those are simple logit and probit regressions. In other cases, they become more complicated. Multinomial probit model, multinomial logit model, and so on. So initially it was done in a structural way. People would write a structural model of the agents. They would solve it, and under a lot of assumptions on those models and a lot of statistical assumptions on distributions and functions and all those things, they would come up with an equation, and then they would estimate those equations and account for selection or decision making which is happening behind this process. On the other hand, now people don't focus too much on, at least in this particular literature that we are talking about, focus too much on the structure, actually writing the structure. they think, but they think about omitted variables in a more careful way. Okay, and as we progress, you will see that here people think more about designing an identification strategy. That's what they call it, and they would exploit things like natural experiments and all those things. So when we come to a different, talking about differences and for example, one identification strategy, and using fixed effects is another identification strategy. Regression discontinuity design. So we will also talk about something called regression discontinuity design. Is like another identification strategy, and so on. There are many. Some key identification strategies which are used quite a lot, we will talk about here, but there are quite a few. Okay. So any questions?
So what did that subscript UB stand for in the delta term?
Oh, that's just unobserved. So I'm highlighting that with delta because of unobserved omitted variables.
Okay. And sir, another question, even if we are able to take into account all the other variables that are there, which are affecting the Y variable,
Right.
even then we wouldn't know whether X is causing Y or Y is causing X, right? Like in Khushi's question, whether higher incomes are causing people to go to attend these training programs, or whether training programs are able to
Yes,
result in higher income.
that's true. That's true. So, and we will talk about that too. So, you can have multiple problems here, right? You can have selection. You can have omitted variable. You can have a specification problem, and we can also have endogeneity, or simultaneously the both of them are simultaneously being determined, right? So Y and D both are determined within the system itself. So if we go back to the structural thing that we are talking about, it's possible that both of them have their own equation where both, like in each other they feature, right? So we don't know, you are right in that we don't know what is the problem here, whether it is they being jointly determined, or omitted variable selection, or what, we don't know. But you can basically but and later on we will I will talk about this, but basically you can think of all of these as all of these as sort of closely related to each other. Okay, so for example, in this particular case, let's say that a farmer's ability, or how progressive a farmer is omitted. Okay, so a more progressive farmer would be very keen on learning about new technologies. So you can assume that a more progressive farmer would have a greater likelihood of attending these training programs, right? So that's one. Another thing is that a more progressive farmer may also without even a training program may also be like more progressive in his cultivation techniques, or the kind of crops he grows, or the kind of pesticides, fertilizers, inputs he uses. So it's possible that a farmer's progressiveness may influence the per capita income also, because they are more progressive. They want to use new techniques. They use good quality inputs and so on. And since they are more progressive, they are more keen to learn about these things. So they also attend training programs. So in this case, what is happening is that if that omitted variable, that variable is not accounted for in the regression, it is basically inducing simultaneity in the dependent variable and the treatment. So because of the omission of that variable, it is leading to simultaneity problems. So in that sense, like all these three things are very closely related to each other, right? So it's very hard to, if you go through, if you read some papers, you will find that it's very hard to, at least without writing a structure, proper model, it's very hard to, even then you have to make assumptions. But it's not easy to separate these things out. Whether whether it's simultaneously these things are being determined, or whether there is an omitted variable or what. But the convention is to use these identification strategies and to basically get around these problems. So we may not in particular say that, oh, this is the problem here. We may not pinpoint to one particular problem, but we may in general say that there is either selection or there is omitted variables, right? And you will also see people talking about simultaneity and endogeneity. So if like in the context of the structural models, we said what goes on the right hand side and what goes on the left hand side it determines what is endogenous and what is exogenous. In this particular case, it may be that both di and yi, both of them are endogenous, but so we don't know. But that endogeneity may be induced by a third variable which is omitted, right? So does that clarify?
Yes, sir.
Right. So let's move on now. So what do we do about this? So there is a lambda, as we saw, there is a lambda here. So the next set of slides are in continuation of what we talked about. So we will remember these terms and the equation that we were considering. So remember, we had a lambda here, an omitted variable. Okay. And what can we do? What can we do about this omitted variable? So there can be complicated ways of dealing with it, or having more data can also help. So for example, consider this case. So like it's the same equation that we were thinking about, and we said that the error term, this error term has two components. One is an omitted variable, the other is the classical error of the regression. Now suppose, and this is going back to what somebody said about past incomes. Okay, so right now we were working with the assumption that the data that we have is cross-sectional, right? Just one slice of time. Okay, so suppose now we observe these farmers for 2 time periods, right? So we have panel data now, and in the next class, what I'm going to do is, rather than showing you these slides, I will now, in the next class, I will switch to actually running some of these, showing you these data sets, not exactly this data set, but some other data sets, so that you get to see how, how does a real panel data, have you worked with data sets before, like within your master's program? Have you worked on data sets, run regressions? Or
Not everyone, sir.
Yeah.
Some of us did. Not everyone, some of us did.
okay, so I can assume that you are not familiar with data sets, like real data sets, not like like 50 observations kind of a thing. So in the next class, what I'm going to do is I will show you some actual data sets, like for example NSS data sets, like which people use thousands and thousands of households. And I will so I'll show you some cross-sectional data sets. I'll show you how these data sets are laid out. Then we will also run some regressions. If you want, you can, I'll put them on my website, so you can download those data sets. You can download the code files, associated code files, and if you want, you can run those regressions simultaneously on your systems as I do it here. So, but we will go through some data sets. We will see how these data sets look. We will run these regressions, and we will look at all of these things that we are talking about in practice. Okay, how does it look when we actually do these things? Okay. Okay, so we'll do that in the next class. So spread the word among your friends that they don't miss the next few classes. Okay. So suppose now we were working with cross-sectional data. We had, it was households were observed just at a point in time. Now suppose we are observing the same household, so we are following these households and we have this data for 2 time periods. So now we have an T subscript along with the I subscript, right, in our Y. And so since we have I, the household, for 2 time periods, let's say we are writing it as YIT, right? So Y outcome for individual household I at time period T. Similarly, the treatment is for household I at time period T. And here I am saying that it's for N time period, right? It can be anything. Sorry, N individuals, N households, 1 to N, and the time period is 1 to T. So we now have a panel data. Each individual or unit is observed over multiple periods of time. Okay. So what the equation that you are working with, if now since we have panel data, we can write that equation like this. So we can, the only difference is comparing this to this, the only difference is now that we have this T subscript. So YIT is equal to alpha plus delta DIT plus the error term. Okay. And again, we maintain the assumption that the error term is of, it has 2 parts. One is the omitted variable lambda I and epsilon IT. Okay. So everything is, I'm continuing with the same example as the last set of slides, but the only difference here is, yeah.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, do we include lambda I as a dummy variable for each cross-section unit?
Of course, but you are jumping to yeah, you're right. But let's wait for others to also, I'm coming to that thing. Okay.
Yes.
But you're right. Okay. So so I'm continuing with the same story. Now only difference is that we have multiple time periods, and again we maintain that assumption that the error term has 2 parts, lambda I, the omitted variable, and the error term. Okay. Given that this is, now you have this additional information that you have 2 time periods, and we know that if this lambda is omitted from our earlier discussion, we are going to have this bias, omitted variable bias. Now, can you think of what we can do with this two period data or NT period data to resolve this omitted variable, to get around this omitted variable? Any guesses on what you can do with 2 time periods or multiple time periods? Other than the person who just said something, anybody else would like to?
We can take the model and deviate it from its mean.
Sorry, what?
Sir, for like we can take the expectation of the model and deviate it from its mean. Like for example, yi bar equal to alpha plus delta di bar plus epsilon I bar, and we can just difference it from that. It will decrease the degrees of freedom.
Does that have a name? So what you just explained, does that have a name? The procedure. Anybody else would like to add to what we can do now about these lambda i's with 2 time periods?
So given that the lambda I does not has a T subscript, so that means it's same over the 2 time period.
Right.
So what we can do is we can take, say, a previous time period and have a difference between the 2 time periods. So that will eliminate the lambda I for us.
Exactly. Yeah, that's also right. Does that have a name?
Sir, I don't know.
Okay.
Sir, first difference.
Yeah, who is that?
Sir, Devesh.
Yeah, what did you say?
Sir, I'm saying you asked, does it have a name? So I'm saying is it called first difference?
Yes, so yes, exactly. So first difference is when you have two time periods and you would just difference, like take the difference between the first and the second, that's first difference. But the thing about, subtracting the mean or expected value, that is that, what is that called? That
Deviation from?
No, I mean, of course it's deviation, but it has a name. Anyways, what is important, I think what is important, which one of you pointed out, I don't know who said it, but one of you pointed out was that lambda I does not vary with t. Okay, that's very important. Since lambda I does not vary with t, you can use all these methods that you have just explained. One is that when you have two time periods, and lambda I is not varying over time, so it's time invariant. Or if suppose I say that lambda I is the progressiveness of a farmer or the ability of a farmer, that what I'm saying, what the assumption, if I do this first difference, the assumption is that the ability of a farmer does not vary over time. It remains constant over time. So under that assumption that lambda I does not have a t, or lambda is time invariant, or ability is time invariant, or the omitted variables are time invariant, we can basically take the differences of those two time periods and the lambda I will be cancelled out because it does not vary over time. So that's one way of doing it. Another way, as you pointed out, is basically demeaning the data, right? So demeaning can be done either with two time periods or with multiple time periods. Same can be done with first difference can also be done with two time periods or multiple time periods. Demeaning will achieve the same thing. Now, can you also tell me, you will demean, so the average that you will take, which you will subtract from the main equation, that average would be on what dimension, I or t?
Sir, over t.
Over t, right? So exactly. So if you take average over t, since lambda does not vary over time with time, that will come out. And then when you subtract that averaged equation from this original equation, the lambda i's will cancel out. So that thing that's there in next few slides. So I will show you the simple algebra that's there. But it's the very important idea here is that when we have multiple time periods, okay, when you have multiple when a unit is followed over time, then you have this option of controlling for these lambdas or through these various techniques. So you can either do first difference, or what the demeaning procedure that you described is called the fixed effects estimator or within estimator. Okay, so that's what is called the fixed effects or the within estimator. These lambdas are called fixed effects. They are called fixed effects because they are fixed over time, right? Each individual has a lambda, but they don't vary over time. So so this is a very simple way of dealing with this problem. So now, like the example that we were talking about, the farmers training example, suppose we observed those households over two time periods, and our problem was that this lambda I, so for example, can you think of a fixed effect or a lambda I in the context of the farmers, the training program example, which is constant over time but is different across farmers, other than let's say ability or progressiveness? any variable in that for that example, which may not vary over time but may be different across households.
Religion of the farmer.
Exactly. Yeah, religion. Anything else? Sorry, what did you say? I didn't hear you. So what about geographical differences?
For the land size.
Land size may, yeah, if
Regional effects like job. Yeah.
yeah, your voice is breaking, so it's not clear, but yeah, but anything which is environmental, like rainfall, temperature, differences in rainfalls and temperatures, differences in geography, differences in natural endowments, soil fertility, soil quality, anything which is anything which is natural endowments based will not vary over time. I mean, that's a safe assumption to make that land size, plot sizes would, for a very, very long time horizons, would actually vary over time, right? Because if in a 10-year, 20-year period, you may find that plot sizes, go down. But for like within 2 years, that's a safe assumption to make that even plot sizes may not vary for like a few months or between 2 years. But differences in natural endowments, which may be very important in this particular context. When we are talking about agricultural productivity, soil quality, soil type, rainfall, temperature, geography, altitude, slope, all those things are very critical because those are inputs in agricultural production. So all of those things would be taken care of by just a simple first difference or a simple demeaning, right? So this is in that sense, this is an identification, fixed effects estimator or first difference estimators can all, you can think of them as identification strategies also. If the only issue you are dealing with is these omitted time invariant variables, right? So it's a very simple way of dealing with these lambdas. So now let's go through the fixed effects model. So basically, this is nothing but substitute this NIT eta IT here in this equation, and you have this now. So we have a lambda I here now, and these lambda i's, as we know, are called fixed effects, right? They are different across individuals, but invariant over time, right? And the rest, the model is the same as before. We now have a, so it's also called a one-way error component or a one-way fixed effects model, right? So you have just one dimension of fixed effects here, lambda I. There can be two. So this lambda I can be an unobservable, or can, it can either be an unobservable variable or it can be a measurement error in YITs, right? So it can be anything. We don't know what these lambda is capture. It can be one variable, it can be multiple time invariant variables, it can be a linear combination of time invariant variables, it can be measurement error in YIT, which is time invariant, anything, right? So, but we are not worried about what goes into lambda ITs. We will as we see, we will just remove them through some manipulation or transformation. Because here in this particular example, we are interested in delta. So we don't care about lambda IT. We care about lambda ITs only to the extent that we know that lambda I and lambda I and DIT are correlated. And if we don't control for these, or if we don't remove these, then our estimate of delta would be biased. Okay. So, and as we know, can we estimate this equation from cross-sectional data? This equation? We cannot, right? Because how will you remove this lambda I from this equation, right? So let's now, I will just go through the fixed effects model I have, and then we will stop because so we have first difference, we have fixed effects, and then we have two-way fixed effects. So two type of fixed effects. And then I'll again come back to my agricultural comment. Yeah, question. So I'll come back to my the old example of training, and then we will talk about fixed effects and how that actually how that features into this story. So let me just talk about demeaning. So has this been covered in your IGIDR courses, the fixed effect estimator and the first difference? Was this covered or no?
Yes, a fixed effects estimator was covered in econometrics too.
So you know, that means it's not, I don't have to go through all the story. I can just tell you what it is. Okay. So this is the equation we had, right?
So here we have skipped the time variant component, right? The intercept term in the previous thing.
Sorry, time invariant. What did you say?
No, time variant. So if we go to the previous slide.
Yes.
Sir, in that above, there was an alpha component also, which we have not included here.
Oh, right. So that was the intercept, the constant term of the regression. In a fixed effect model, you can also think of it this way, that the constant term in the fixed effect model varies with each individual, right? So every individual have their own intercept. So you can think of that lambda I as we started with an alpha, which was constant for everyone, but now the unconditional average with fixed effects varies with each individual. So that alpha is now replaced by lambda I. Okay.
So, but that alpha would also be time variant, right? Like won't it be dependent on time?
The intercept term, which alpha?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The intercept term.
It would be, but so of course it would be, but right now we have just one way fixed effect. Of course, later on we will talk about a time variant intercept also. So that's called a two-way error component model, where you have two types of fixed effects. Of course it would be. I mean, you can have, and then we will talk about even more complicated fixed effect strategies, where you would have state, unit cross time fixed effects and so on and on. So you can have as many as you want. But let's start with a simple story where we have, yeah.
Sir, this intercept should subsume the benchmark category dummy variable. I mean, this should explain the average. If we have n cross sections, so we will introduce n-1 dummies in fixed effects. So that one dummy will be the intercept term. I mean, that would be the benchmark category. So that should be, by the definition of fixed effects, that should be time invariant, not dependent on the T subscript in this model.
Of course, in this model, it's under assumption. What you are right. In this particular model, it's time invariant, but you can have another model like this, for example. Consider this mod equation where we have a lambda I within a panel data setup. We have a lambda I and we have a mu t, where like lambda i's were just varying across individuals but not varying over time. We have a mu t term here which does not vary across individuals but varies over time. Okay. So that's what I guess that's what you were asking, right? When you were saying alpha can be time variant.
Sir, yes, sir. In this model, this alpha is time invariant and mu is cross-sectional invariant. So these both are intercepts. So if we have t time period, so we must have introduced t minus 1 dummies. So that one benchmarks dummies would be captured in this mu t.
Right, that's right. That's right, yes. So, but for now, let's stick to this simple structure, okay? And let's forget about mu t for now.
So I had like one comment about
Yeah.
So someone said that we had covered it, but I'm not sure if like it was covered. I think it was covered very fast. It went very fast for me. So if you could please go through the basics of it, like, and it was covered in the context of I think panel data, and it was like very heavy in mathematical content, at least for me.
Okay, so
very fast, then that would be great.
Yeah, so I will go through the basics of it. For all practical purposes and for this particular course, what we have to know about fixed effects is that fixed effects basically, depending upon what kind of assumptions you make on your the theoretical relationship, these fixed effects can actually deal with omitted variables. Okay, that's what we are going to talk about, and we are going to talk about the fixed effect estimator and the first difference estimator. Not heavily mathematically, I'll just show you how a simple transformation, a simple demeaning can remove those fixed effects, or a simple first differencing can remove those fixed effects. And I think for applied microeconomics, for doing empirical work, this is what you should know, right? You don't have to go into the details of the deriving the estimator and thinking about the statistical assumptions and all those things. We don't have to talk about that. We'll just but we will see how these things handle selection and omitted variable and all those. So I will go through that. And even more important than this is that I will actually show you these things in action, in the sense that I'll show you how, when we look at data, right, real data, how how these things are operationalized in data. So how do you can actually take a data set, panel data set, you can calculate these averages, cross-sectional averages or time averages, you can subtract them from the data, and you run a regression, you see what that coefficient is. So you can do these things, and so we'll do that. We'll actually do that with data, and we'll see how these estimators work. Okay, so how they remove these components. But for now, just follow what's there in these slides, and I think you will be all right. Okay. So this simple equation with just time invariant but individual varying across individuals fixed effect. Okay, so what we do is we take average on both sides. So average over t, average over time period. So we have y for each individual for each time period. There are t time periods. Similarly, dit is also for each individual each time period. You take average of this equation over t, right? So I'm expressing that average as bar. So y bar I is basically average over t. This does not vary over time, so nothing happens to this. Delta does not vary over time, so nothing happens to this. This dit, average over time, becomes d bar I. And then epsilon it also varies over time, becomes epsilon bar I. Okay. Now subtract this equation, the averaged equation from this equation. So yit minus y bar I, right? And then dit minus d bar I, epsilon it minus epsilon bar I. So you can write it like this. Notice what has happened. These lambda i's were there in both of these equations. So the lambda i's get cancelled out, right? When you subtract this from this. So what does this mean? It means that if you calculate this, you have a y. So for example, in our our example, like the example that you're working with, the Y was per capita agricultural income, and D was a dummy variable for training. So what you can do is you can, if suppose we have multiple time periods, you take for each individual over time, you take the average of the per capita income. Similarly, for each time period, for each individual I over time periods, you take the average of the training program dummy, and you subtract that from the actual data that you have, and run a simple OLS. That's what you do. Okay, so it's as simple as that. And that transformation, that demeaning ensures that this fixed defect is removed. And how is this removed? If you think about it intuitively, the fixed defect is time invariant. So if you the average, this average that we are subtracting, that average in itself captures that fixed element, which varies across individuals. So once you once you remove that average from the your actual data, that fixed, it also removes that fixed defects along with once you demean, right? So demeaning solves your problem. And notice that since you have from each individual's outcome or treatment or variables, for each individual, since you have removed the mean time, time mean, the variation that you are left now. So this difference that is there is just within individuals, right? So since you have removed the time average, it's like within individual variation, right? So it's that's why it's called a within estimator. So fixed defect estimator is also called a within estimator, because once you remove those averages, it's just the variation that you are left with is just within individuals. And so it's also called a within estimator. Okay. And so some changes happen in the degrees of freedom. Why? Because since you have calculated these averages from the data itself and have subtracted those from the data, you actually used some degrees of freedom, right? And so in a simple OLS, the degrees of freedom would be n times t if you have panel data minus k number of parameters. But with fixed defect estimator, you have basically used up these some of the degrees of freedom. So you have now less. It's n into t minus 1 minus k, right? So but all the softwares that we have now all automatically take this into account. And when you will tell the software to estimate, do a fixed defects estimation, it's going to automatically adjust for degrees of freedom changes. Or if you actually introduce dummy variables, so as you already pointed out, this also means that you can have n minus i dummy variables, right? So if suppose there are 5 individuals, you can have 4 dummy variables. One would be the base category. So if you explicitly add a dummy variable for each individual in this regression, right? In that case, this degree of freedom correction is done within the OLS, since you have now additional parameters in the regressions itself, right? So in that case, this is done. But if we are using a fixed defect, this kind of a demeaning procedure, then the software does it for you. So another thing which you pointed out was that a fixed defect estimator is equivalent to a least squares dummy variable regression. So you can also do this by adding dummy variables to your regression. So if you have panel data for I units, you can have I minus 1 dummy variables to your regression. And so those dummy variables also would wipe out the lambda i's. For each unit I, they will account for that fixed defect explicitly. So that coefficient on each of those dummy variables is actually giving you the the influence of this lambda I. But we don't care about those coefficients because we don't know what those lambda i's are, right? So It's basically a catch-all variable. It has all sorts of things. But you can either do it through a dummy variable regression, LSDV, with least squares dummy variable regression model, or you can do it through this. Next class, I will show you. I will show this explicitly with data and run some regression. I'll show you how these regressions are all equivalent. Whether you do a dummy variable, how do you run a dummy variable regression? If some of you don't know how that's done, how do you estimate a fixed effects regression? And the estimates from these two regressions are exactly the same, right? They don't differ. So I'll stop here. I don't want to rush through this. But if you have any questions or clarifications, you can ask.
So,
yeah.
So can you go back to the slide?
Which one?
Sir, where we are demeaning.
This one.
Yes, sir. Sir, yes, sir. The last question. So after demeaning, so we don't have any intercept term, right?
Yes.
And we are going to use OLS estimator.
Yes.
So, will there be any problem?
So you can add an intercept here. That's not an issue. See, the thing is, if we go back to our mechanics of the OLS, what is it doing? It's fitting a line to data, right? So that line, think about an x-axis and a y-axis. So what is the intercept? The intercept is where your fitted regression line intersects the y-axis, right? That would be the intercept. In this particular case, the equation that we just referred to, essentially what it is saying is that it's passing through 0, 0, right? So origin, it's passing through the origin. But when we do these things, actually, it's not a good idea to estimate a regression without an intercept. So even if, for example, this model shows you that there is no intercept, even when we run, when we do this in Stata or any other software for that matter, we will add an intercept term, because not adding an intercept term is more problematic than adding an intercept term. So if we add an intercept term, what you will see is that intercept term would be very close to 0. So that essentially means that there is no intercept term, right? So we will always add an intercept term to our regression, irrespective of whether our algebras, whatever our algebra says, we will still add an intercept term to the regression. Anything else?
Yes, sir.
Sir, epsilon I bar, shouldn't it be 0?
Why?
I mean, if it is an OLS regression, then the average of error terms should be 0.
No, but this is IT now. So it's IT, epsilon IT, right? So you have n times I is n, t is t. So you have n cross t observations. So n cross t error terms. So that would be 0, mechanically 0, only when you average across all of those. Here we are averaging just over time, right? But there is still a variation across individuals in errors, right?
Okay, sir, got it. And regarding the intercept, this if DIT is a vector, then it will have a vector of ones which would give the intercept, and the dummy variable will be only added to that intercept. So if it is a vector, then we already have an intercept here.
Right, but here I guess the conclusion was that I am talking about this not in vector terms. You are right, in vector terms we can add a column of ones, but here I'm not talking. We are not considering this as a vector, so I think that's where the confusion was. Yes. Another question.
So can you go back to that selection bias example where we have 5 models?
This one.
Sir, more like last slide.
This one. Which one? This is the last. These are the slides.
Sir, where we have result of 5 results, five results.
These ones.
Yes.
This table.
Yes. Sir.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sir, sir, suppose we have data and we try to estimate models, and we add variables, and we find that our R bar square is same and R square is also same. Just like here, R square is same across the model even after adding variables.
Right.
So, sir, which model to select? Like how we proceed, which model will be the best for us? Is it only selection bias we are going to look at, or there are other aspects as well at which we should look while selecting a model?
See, R squares generally we will not be worried about a lot. Okay, so we would not be worried about what is the R square. So generally we will ignore it, and unless we are unless in questions of causality where you are interested.
Yes, sir. I'm talking in general.
Causality or general case.
Yeah, yes, causality case.
So in when you are interested in establishing causality, you would generally not worry too much about R squares, okay? Because R squares are saying, at least here, are not saying much about or the causal relationship. But hopefully by the end of this course, I will briefly talk about this touch on this literature on partial identification, where you will see how R square also have some say in this kind of a coefficient movement that we are seeing, or some say in causality. But in general, people don't worry too much about R squares. See, in this literature, we what basically, and that's why I started the course with talking about structural models. When you are thinking of causality, you have a story in your head. Okay, so you have a story in mind. You already have a research design in your mind. What you do is essentially you pick up your data, and the design that you have in your mind, you implement that design. So there is no model selection like what you may have in, let's say, a time series literature, where you will have like pitch one model against the other and see which has a higher AIC or BIC, or do a likelihood ratio test and all those things. In this literature, we don't compete. We don't we don't compare models, one model with other based on some criterion or R squares or any other fit criterion. Here the identification, we already have a model in mind. That model comes from some structure that we are thinking of, right? And then what we do is we think of our empirical model, what we would like to estimate based on the structure that we have in mind, and we estimate it. And then the rest of the analysis focuses on showing the reader that what the structure that you have thought of is the right structure for that particular setup. So that so that's why R squares may not you may not see people worrying too much about R squares in these the kind of papers that we will go through. So there is no model selection. To answer what you were asking, there is generally no model selection. People already, they would say that this is what we will do. Okay, this is, so they'll say we will use fixed effects, and then they will show you fixed effects, and that's it. So they will not compare a fixed effects model with some other model and then say that this has lower R square, that has higher R square, so this is better than that, and so on. Okay, but you will get you'll have better idea of these things when we actually start reading some papers. Okay.
So just a small doubt.
Yeah.
So, sir, a very low R square wouldn't a very low R square directly imply that we have omitted a lot of variables and therefore there is a selection bias?
It may or may not. It may or may not, because all the unexplained variation y goes into the error term. So that variation may just be pure noise. So it may just be measurement error, right? Especially in cross-sectional data, measurement errors, the kind of data that I'm showing you, survey data and income has a lot of measurement error. Okay, so it may or may not, we are not sure, but there is a way of linking R square movements with coefficient movements. I mean, it's not that you are right. Some of those omitted variables may also, I mean, the omission of variables may also be reflected in a lower R square, but we cannot never be 100% sure of those things. Okay. Anything else? So I think let's so Tuesday next week, okay, and by that time I'll send your group assignments, also upload your group assignments so you can have a look at your group, who your group members are, and then I will also most probably give you a like a home assignment. Okay, so I'm not thinking of giving you a home assignment where you have to go through, like solve some do some mathematical algebra or something. You don't have to solve anything. I'll most probably give you something to read, okay, as a group. It may be a paper, or most probably will be a paper, and what you have to do is you read it, okay, and you can discuss among your group members or whatever. You can look on the go to look at resources on the internet. You can see, you can read whatever you want, and then what you have to do is you have to basically whatever I give you to read, you have to basically read it, understand what that thing is saying, and then write it to me, write a 2-page passage in your own words explaining what that paper is telling you. Okay, so so that's the kind of assignment you're going to do. So next week I'll also tell you what that is. Okay, so okay, see you next week Tuesday then. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you,
bye.
sir.